Yo, what's up, everybody? So, this is session one of three for a three-part end of the year series on what we need to let go of, what we want to celebrate, what we want to remember, and then setting up ourselves with the proper goals for the next year upcoming. Okay. So, the reason I built out this entire series and training is what I'm finding with so many guys is that they're wanting to go into their next year carrying the same old shit. And it just doesn't work. If they want any new results, something different has to change. So there does come a time where we have to utilize some reflection, getting to understand what are the things that are keeping us stuck, what are the outdated identities, what is the mental weight, what's the emotional friction, if you will, that's continuing to hold them back from getting to their goals, especially as they enter in a new year. So many people are very quick to jump on the new year, new me resolution train, if you will. And while that's amazing, if you don't actually change from within, you're just going to go at it for 2 weeks and then go right back to your old patterns and default back. And that is not what my goal is with any of the clients that I work with or men that I work with. It's to actually create sustainable change from within so it can happen in all different areas of life and it can be sustainable. All right. So that's the reason why I built up this training. Again, I'm finding that most men that I work with, high performing men, whether they're business owners, whether they're entrepreneurs, business professionals, they have the sales skills. They have the business acumen. They're not being held back by strategy on what they don't know what to do. Instead, what they are being held back is by what's feeling like not isn't fully resolved or things that are unresolved from within them. All right. So they're carrying around lots of mental weight, lots of dead weight, like an anchor almost, if you will, from this current year into the new year. And that shows up in many different ways. It shows up in ways like stories about why things are the way they are, certain beliefs, certain patterns, certain people in their circles, and then, of course, certain emotional remnants that they're carrying around from all the things that happened in this past year. And if that weight doesn't get removed or it doesn't get, there isn't any light shed on it, then guess what happens? Well, then it continues to go on into that next year. And now we're running full steam ahead into the next year with basically a sack of potatoes on our back, or probably 20 for many guys, right? So this specific training, we will have one that's later is about goals, but this one isn't about goals. This is more about clearing out the internal clutter that is going to block you from reaching whatever goals you do have. And this is a misconception or an issue that I find too many guys get into is they don't do this type of reflection at the end of the year as they enter into a new year, and they just pile on new goals on top of this shaky foundation that isn't fully cleaned up. And that becomes a recipe for disaster because on a shaky foundation, they're trying to add new stuff on top. And if that weight becomes too much pressure, too much stress, and they don't know how to handle it, or things are unresolved underneath, this is going to break. And then those goals that they were going after don't get reached. And then they get upset and then it repeats, and they can waste months, if not a full year, dealing with this if they were to just take some of this time and do some of this right now. So, first things first, I'm just going to go through a series of questions that I feel like are highly valuable and highly important in terms of wanting to take a look at what is the internal weight that you are still carrying with you from this year into next year, and how can you let it go. Now, I've done this with a couple of different clients, and I get to do this with myself. And honestly, this is a great exercise as well to do with any of your business partners or any of your significant others as a way to just end out the year, and just really create a lot of self-reflection. All right. So the first ones, I'm going to write these out on my iPad so you can see them on the screen. Okay. So first and foremost is number one, and this is a very, very broad one, but we want to think about it. So number one is, what version of me am I outgrowing? And so I want you to think about when it comes to this, right? What version of me am I outgrowing? Think about the individual that you've become, the identity that you've created that works. And honestly, you might be very successful in this version of you, but it's starting to feel almost too safe, too comfortable. And you know, if you want to get to the next level and whatever it is, could be your relationship, could be business, could be your personal growth, that you know that you are going to have to leave this version of you behind. So I want you to think through this. If it means that you need to pause this video, take a moment, close your eyes, go within, you could definitely do that. But I want you just to invite I want to invite you to notice where specific parts of this identity either feel heavy, they feel outdated, they're feeling restrictive, maybe they feel like they're the old you and you could do it with your eyes closed. I'll give you an example. So, for instance, for me, what version of me am I outgrowing? Well, in this current season of life, I am outgrowing the idea that I am just a partner in terms of my relationship with my significant other. We've been together as girlfriend and boyfriend for quite some time, but I'm outgrowing that dating stage and I want to step into this new chapter. And so I have to leave behind all of the old ways of just dating and be able to leave behind the identity of what it's like to say, oh, this is just my girlfriend in these areas that feel like they're not moving along. They're a little bit stagnant. So I want to be able to take that next step into our relationship. Okay. So first things first, what version of you are you outgrowing? Obviously, I wrote it in your language. What version of me am I outgrowing? That's the first thing. And this is a tough pill for many guys to swallow, but when you can get really honest about this, you can start to see which version of you is no longer needed. And you can almost say, hey, old version of me, thank you for all that you have given me. Thank you for all that you've helped me with to get to this point, and I appreciate you. But for right now, I'm retiring you and I'm moving into something new. I'll give you one other example just to make it a little bit more clear on like a business sense. I have one client. He has created a business and he's built this business and he's hit his main goal in his business is starting to run like a well-oiled machine, but he's not feeling challenged enough in his business anymore. So the version of him that he's outgrowing is the version of him that is only focused on this recurring model theme, specifically in his property management business. He's stepping out of being the expert in property management and he's going to be doing more delegating. So he's going to move out of more hands-on manager employee role and move into more of the leadership role of that so he can free up his time and move elsewhere. Okay, so just think about that. Could be a personal context, could be a business context, but this is one of the first questions that we're going to go through. Now, the second one is this is another one that I think is very important to contemplate on. And of course, each one of these questions can go much deeper, and there's lots to extrapolate from each one of these, which if you ever are interested, obviously that's what I do with my clients. And then we're able to set up a game plan on how to get beyond that. But for now, this is just about getting stuff out of your head and onto paper and creating some observations. So when we go into the next training, which is the second training, which is more about celebrating all that went well and what do we want to remember from this year. And then, of course, when we do the goal setting, that this gives you at least some adequate information on what you want to improve on. Okay. So the second one is what story from this year, what story from this year has kept me playing small? All right. Now, you might not know what that is for you. So I'm going to give you guys a couple examples. One in particular, I'll use an example for even for myself, really. Honestly, in 2025, what kept me small the first 6 months of the year was this story that I had to do it all alone in my business. And this was keeping me from being able to progress and utilize my time as wisely as possible. Now, there's other areas in my life, and I see this with many men, that they're afraid to let go and release control over, specifically in business and delegating and letting other people do things for them. That seems like, oh, that makes sense because now I can do it right and I can make sure it's done effectively. But really, for the life that they're going after, the type of freedom that they want, this is actually keeping them small by not going into it. So the story around that would be like, I have to do it all alone, or no one can do it like me. And there may be other stories for you. And this could, again, be professional or be in the personal side of things. But I want you to think about, again, if you need to pause or take a moment and ask yourself, what story, otherwise, what belief, what internal narrative have you created this year that's kept you small, kept you from playing, or that's kept you playing small, sorry about that, but kept you playing small. So think about it. If you were to change one narrative or one story around the year that you've had, which area would have gotten you the most amount of growth? All right. So take some time, reflect on that. Next up is number three. This is a very important one. And this is what emotions drain me most of my energy, and where do they come from? All right, so if you feel like, let's say, for instance, you have tons of anxiety around upcoming projects in your business, or let's say you deal with tons of frustration because of lack of communication or poor communication, whether it's with a business partner, with a client, or maybe even with your significant other. First and foremost, we want to pay attention to the emotion. Most likely, you will be able to find out, you can very easily come up with some of those emotions. Then from there, we want to think about, all right, where are these stemming from? And later on, we can talk about how do we then improvement. But if we aren't bringing this to the surface, right, and we just keep suppressing these emotions and keep thinking that they're normal and don't do anything about it, we keep putting our nervous system into that survival mode, which is making you less money. It's making you less present, which means you're not utilizing your time as effectively. You're way more reactive in all of your relationships. And that will continue to create a snowball effect. And eventually over time, that is when guys, blow up and get themselves into really bad spots. So you just want to be conscious of which emotions drain you the most of your energy and where do they come from. Again, this is great because if you can create and take inventory of what emotions are draining to you and where do they stem from, then that gives you at least a clue or a roadmap or an opportunity. It's not a problem anymore. It's an opportunity to address those. Again, like I said, if you are frustrated because there's a poor communication amongst team members or poor communication amongst you and your significant other, whatever it might be, and you know that that's where it's stemming from, then that's a clue for you to how can I better improve my communication so I don't feel that way, so I can get more time back feeling the way I would like to feel. All right, so that was number three. Number four, this one is, again, this is another clue or it's another key to notice about when you are feeling those emotions. So this is what behaviors did I use to cope instead of addressing the real issue. Now, keep in mind, there are many, when we go right to coping, we think of, for many of us at least, we think of coping in terms of drinking, in terms of potentially smoking weed, but there's many other ways, right? We can numb out with alcohol, with drugs. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely a possibility. But other individuals have a tendency for avoidance. They can find themselves overworking. They can utilize food. They can utilize gambling. They can utilize being by themselves, always needing to do everything on their own. And so I want you just to be honest with yourself. This is very important. If you are honest with yourself around this, you will realize that many of us try to go around the problem, and it is what I've been told as, one of my mentors says this, it's like putting a Band-Aid over a bullet hole. So for instance, let me give you an example. Let's say there is a real issue with all of the stress and pressure from you and your workplace. And if you have all that stress, all that pressure, and you are using alcohol, let's say, to numb out and go out and get drinks with the guys at the end of work to take the pressure off, okay, that works for that night. And then you wake up the next morning and it's all still there. And so we want to be very, very aware of which behaviors are we using to cope instead of going into the real issue. Now, don't get me wrong, going into the real issue can be, and oftentimes is, a bit uncomfortable. But here's the thing. It's a short-term pain, if you will, for a long-term gain because you're actually doing the internal work, changing out some of these patterns, better understanding where you're coming from and how to manage your emotions in a healthy way versus doing something that's only temporary, still leaves you with those same struggles long term. All right. So that's number four. Next is going to be more focused on the business section. So if you feel like you didn't get enough time to go through any of those, then be sure to go back to that. But this next section is going to be more along the lines of what no longer fits you for your next chapter. All right. Now, first things first is we want to look at it in two ways. Now, this is going to be more for business and also just overall money mindset and money stories. But this new one is what way of making money no longer feels aligned. Now, keep in mind if you're not a business owner or you don't have your own, if you're not an entrepreneur and you don't have the ability to just switch on and off in terms of like what feels good, what doesn't, which revenue streams are most effective, which ones take up the most of your energy, then this may be something you skip. Although if you are in a professional setting, like let's say you're a business professional in sales, maybe what you're selling doesn't excite you anymore. And maybe this is a time to reflect on, I want to potentially do something different. Obviously, don't let me be the one to make that decision for you. But for those that are business owners, for those that are entrepreneurs, I want you just to think into your business and ask yourself, like, what areas of revenue are not bringing you in nearly the amount of money in terms of how much headache or how stressful they can be. I want you to think about also which parts of your business feel energetically off or no longer serving to you, and what things are you forcing no matter what, even though you know that it doesn't feel great. Now, keep in mind, this isn't always going to be something that can be changed overnight, but again, I'll give an example, right? So, for instance, I have a client, like I mentioned, he does property management. The property management side of the business no longer excites him. It no longer challenges him. It doesn't mean that he's going to shut that whole business down. No, that business is a vehicle for him to make money. But his mindset has shifted from, hey, this no longer gets me excited. This no longer challenges me. So what ways can I keep this going with less of my time? And now he's thinking about what are the next chapters. Okay. So first and foremost, what way of making money no longer feels aligned? You can also change this out with what way of making money feels more aligned or feels more exciting. If you're not good with the word aligned, just think exciting. And maybe there's a passion project there. Maybe there's something else that you realize could be utilized more of your time. All right, next up is, and this is a big one. I found this to be one of the biggest things holding so many guys back from their next level in their career success, and especially as business owners and entrepreneurs. And I myself have done tons of work on this to rewrite these stories. Okay. So this next one is, what money story am I ready to retire? Now, this is great because right now, what I'm finding is our money mindset is directly correlated to the way we feel when we look at our bank account, the amount of money that we can bring in, how we portray our products, our services as business owners, if you are a business owner, and how much you worry about money. Now, look, our money stories can be related to so many different things. I think I use an example and I've shared it with many different people. But growing up, we were in a good spot. We never didn't go without food, but my mom was always conscious. And I remember you would go to the store and you would see like a name brand versus the generic brand. And my mom would mention that, hey, that is expensive. And although it might have just been $1 or two difference, it created a perception that things are expensive for me. And I went through life living that way. And so there's many different stories around money that we must retire in order to move into the next level, right? And so for some, it might be that money's hard to come by, that if I'm not stressed, then potentially I'm not making money, right? It's whatever it is for you, just think about that. What money story do you need to retire in this year so that when you step into the new year, that thing is no longer holding you back. That thing is no longer clouding your judgment. All right. Next up is, what has your inner voice been telling you that your fear keeps dismissing? So I'll write this out. What is my inner voice telling me that my fear keeps dismissing? Now, if you're unsure what this means, let me put this in a different example. All right. So, what is my inner voice telling me that my fear keeps dismissing? So, for instance, what have you been urged to do recently that every time you go to take that next step, you get scared and you go right back to your old same old default patterns, if you will. So, for instance, let's say that you know for a while that you've been needing to raise your standards when it comes to your health and wellness, and you keep hearing, hey, I need to start getting back to the gym. I need to start keep getting back to the gym. But for some reason, some old identity or some fear or some story about getting started is stopping you. And now you aren't able to actually get the thing done that you want, right? So what is my inner voice telling me that my fear keeps dismissing? All right, so that's number three. And then this last one, this is a heavy one. And I want you to be the most honest with this one than a lot of the other ones because we've all heard it, right? The five people who we spend the most time with are who we become. All right. So the last one in this section is, who in my life needs, who in my life needs to be replaced with a higher quality person? Now, you may have seen some of this if you talked about the emotions specifically that may be stemming from specific relationships that drain you of your energy, of your time. And if you're unsure what this means, just think about specific environments, think about specific people in your life. And again, this is not meant to be judgmental. This isn't saying that they're wrong and I'm right. It's simply being aware of where you want to go and creating and curating the environment for you to get there with more support, with more accountability, right? Some environments are going to suppress your ability to evolve. They're going to keep you small. They're not going to allow for you to throw out ideas. They're not going to be excited for you for when you win. So you want to think about what areas, what people, what environments are suppressing your evolution. And as a result, what people, what type of guys, what type of individuals, male or female, really, are going to help you evolve. Which ones are going to push you forward, challenge you, call you forward, hold you accountable? Is what I'm finding now more than ever is that most guys, their growth requires on upgrading the proximity of men they're around. And we've all heard this as well, right? You never want to be the smartest person in the room because if you are, you're in the wrong room. You want to work to find rooms where you aren't the smartest, where you aren't the most successful, where you don't have all of the knowledge, because that eventually is just going to help bring you up. So think about the people in your life who, if you shed off and replaced with some higher quality, higher caliber individuals, that your life would shift. Again, this doesn't mean that you're cutting people off in a rude way or you're angry, you're never going to talk to them again. It just means it's more about, if you will, recalibrating and putting boundaries around who gets access to your time and energy. All right, so that's a huge one. Now, there are tons of other ones that I want to add in here, but I want to be conscious for the sake of time. All right. Now, this is again session one of three for trainings that we're going to do to end out the year. So keep in mind, most guys are not getting stuck because they don't have the ability to get to the next level. They're getting stuck because they avoid letting go of some of the stuff that we talked about here. Just imagine, right? I'm just going to go back through this. If you let go of the old identity that you know isn't serving you, if you let go of a story or two that kept you playing small for this entire year, if you paid attention to the emotions that drain you of your energy and you switch those around and you got even half of that amount of energy back, if you got rid of even one of the behaviors that you use to cope, if you let go of the ways money is making you feel in terms of that's not excited, if you let go of specific stories around money that you were constantly thinking about, if you actually took action despite that inner voice, and you shut off one or two people in your life and you incorporated one or two more guys in your life that would actually help you, just imagine how much different your next year would be. How much more time, how much more energy, how much more creativity, how much more community accountability that you would get by simply taking an inventory and taking some small, meaningful actions towards switching a couple things around. And honestly, they don't even take more time to your day, right? It takes the same amount of time to call an old friend as it does to call a new friend. It takes the same amount of time to go out and get drinks with the guys as it does to just go do a workout instead in terms of behaviors, right? It takes the same amount of time to get mad and upset because you miscommunicated as it does if you just communicated properly and manage your emotions. It's just how you interact in the present moment is the difference. Okay, it's the choices that you make. I'm going to encourage you to think one step beyond what you've been thinking all year. So that's the end of this training. This is section or session one of three for the trainings for the end of the year to take inventory on where you're at, what are the things you need to let go of. And then in the next section, we will be going into specifically around celebrating the wins from this year so we can take an inventory of all the things that went well. And then finally, in the last session, we will go into some goal setting so you can set yourself up with a great target, with a trajectory that you want to take your year on, and make sure you have a clear and concrete game plan to getting to the next level. All right, I'll catch up with y'all soon. Take care.